Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2021 to 2022 series Static Season 1. And just to clarify, that's the comic book called Static Season 1, not the first season of the Static Shock TV show. I know that's a little confusing, but that's what DC decided to do. They're just naming everything seasons now. Like Naomi, that was also Season 1. I don't know. Anyway, I've covered 2 Static comics before, so if you want a rundown of the character, I recommend checking those videos out. But what I will say right now is this. Static was originally created as part of the shared universe of Milestone Comics, featuring other major characters such as Icon and Rocket, Hardware, and the Blood Syndicate, all based out of the fictional Midwestern city of Dakota. It was Static that really took off though, thanks to his animated series that was part of the DC animated universe, where he became better known as Static Shock. In 2011, Static's co-creator Dwayne McDuffie sadly passed away, right as the Dakotaverse, as it would be called, was being folded into DC's New 52, and Static got a brand new series. Unfortunately, that run didn't last long, and it seemed that might be the end for Milestone characters. Until 2020 hit. During the August 2020 DC Fandom event, DC announced Milestone Returns, a new continuity that was rebooting the Dakotaverse for a new generation, bringing all the characters back in a self-contained universe where they would get to tell the same kind of stories that were being told by the original Milestone comics, but for a new generation. And who better to lead the way to a new generation than Milestone's biggest star, Static himself. So this comic is really the electrifying beginning of a brand new Milestone universe. Now let's see if it can bring the thunder and take this away. The comic opens on a protest. Just in case I didn't emphasize enough in the intro that this comic came out in 2020, or at least that's when it was being developed, then you'll at least get the idea from the opening protest here, with protesters holding signs saying things like Black Lives Matter, I can't breathe, and she was sleeping. God dang. Already hitting the feels and we've barely even started. This protest is covered in 3 separate places because it's the inciting event for everything that happens in this new Milestone universe. It's covered in the actual Static comic, it's in the original free DC Fandom preview, and it's in the Milestone's Returns comic intended as the official kickoff to the entire reboot. All of which are included in the collected edition for this comic. The downside is they all cover a bit of a different aspect of it, so you really have to read all 3 to understand everything that's happening, or come watch my videos and I'll explain it all to you. That's what I'm here for. So what happens here is that this is a regular Black Lives Matter protest of the exact kind you would have seen popping up in 2020 all over the place during the summer. This one is primarily made up of fed up high school students living in Dakota City. Black nerd Virgil Hawkins, and I mean, how was he going to end up not being a nerd considering his name was Virgil, but anyway, is often bullied at school and not great at dealing with women. You know, nerd archetype in media. But when a girl asks him if he's going to the protest, especially with his crush Frida as one of the said girls going, Virgil of course agrees. Only his bullies also show up to the protest, and like so many others at the time, Virgil has simply had enough. So he finally strikes back and a fight ensues. The police, just itching for a chance to use their riot gear, immediately grab some experimental tear gas and unleash it on the crowd. Many in the crowd just immediately seem to die, while others, like Virgil, become mutated in some way, before collapsing into unconsciousness and being taken away to the hospital. The hospital then apparently refuses to treat the more obviously mutated in the same way as other patients, leaving them in waiting rooms to seemingly die, I guess, instead of getting them beds and actual treatment. This event would then become known as the Big Bang, because after this, everything was different. I find this such an interesting twist. In the original Dakotaverse, the Big Bang was a gang war. It was called the Big Gang before it even happened because it was the big showdown being planned between all the gangs in Dakota. I mean, really, there were just 2, but it is besides the point. There as well, the cops would show up and fling tear gas that we would later learn was filled with something called Q juice, or quantum juice. And that's what led people to gaining powers. At the time, it very much played with the media perspectives of urban gangs, because while the news and politicians were busy fearmongering about street gangs, those regular people involved in such gangs in the Dakotaverse would largely become the superheroes of that universe, really trying to emphasize how gang members aren't necessarily bad people, they can be good people as well, which, believe it or not, was the groundbreaking idea at the time. And changing the Big Bang here to being about a protest is the perfect transition, because this story will just as much play with those kinds of media perspectives. Initially, we'll see righteous outrage. Why did the cops overreact? Who created these chemicals? That second question we do have an answer to, so I'll interrupt my point real quick to say that here, the experimental tear gas was made by Curtis Metcalf, working for Alva Industries. Alva, being a big corporation, can't take the fall though, so all the blame is immediately put on Curtis. And the cops are even sent after him in full force before Curtis is able to do anything, breaking in on one of his labs and immediately opening fire on him. Luckily though, Milestone fans will recognize that Curtis is the superhero Hardware. And he was also smart enough to see this turn coming and prepared himself a supersuit so he could go on the run. And get his own comic eventually, like you do. And that's just the start of the turn, as public opinion will soon shift to fear about these Bang Babies, the name given to these mutants created by the gas. Rather than empathizing with their plight, people begin to be afraid of what these people are going to be capable of doing, and the kind of damage that they can cause with their powers. Much the same kind of fight you would see in any X-Men comic. It's probably not helping any that some guy named Holocaust is leading nightly fireside chats, spurring the Bang Babies to rise up now that they have the means, the tools, and the ability to do so. With troublemakers like that around, it of course isn't long before the feds show up, specifically the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Dudes, your borough name is just too damn long. Before they show up and start disappearing people. This is probably also a reference to real-life events when federal agents in unmarked vans were grabbing people off the streets during the 2020 protest in Portland. That's news that seems to have just completely fallen off of people's radars somehow, even though it seems ridiculously dystopian and like something we should really be talking about. But anyway, the ATF raids one of Holocaust's rallies and grabs a number of the superpowered teenagers, including one Francis Stone. But he likes to call himself Heatwave. Oh, no, sorry, Hot Streak. Whatever. I mixed up the lame fire-themed nickname he gave himself. At least he's not calling himself Fire Fist, though. Ugh. The incredibly small number of you who watched my overview of the original Static comic will know that in that series, Hot Streak was a wannabe gangster calling himself Biz Money B that beat up Virgil one time. And V wanted to get revenge on his bully by gunning him down at the Big Bang. Yeah. That is something that really happened in that original comic. Virgil couldn't go through with the assassination though, but that still put them both at the scene in order to get their superpowers. Hot Streak then became Virgil's first supervillain in a manner of speaking, but after recovering from the initial shock of learning Hot Streak's true identity, Static put him down like the chump that he is. He plays a much larger role in the Static Shock cartoon, which is probably where most people would actually be familiar with him from. In this reboot continuity, Streaker seems to have been more a constant bully to Virgil, so it was Virgil and him that were the initiators of the fight that got the protest labeled as a riot. After both of them were back from the hospital, Hot Streak, in this series named Francis Stone, began using his new gifts to up his bullying game at school. When Virgil saw this, it pissed him off so much that he just fried Hot Streak right then and there, in the hallway of his school, in full view of everybody. And yet he still somehow is going to have a secret identity after this. For real. Their fight gets interrupted by a cop, but Hot Streak isn't ready to just give up, so he shows up one night to Virgil's house and sets it on effing fire. Wow. This is why you have secret identities, Virgil, and you don't go around doing your Spider-Man thing in public where just anybody can see you, Virgil. Jeez, kids these days, I tell ya. Luckily, Virgil was part of an Alva Industries Inventors of Tomorrow program where he trained under one Dr. Curtis Metcalf. You know, that guy I mentioned like a minute ago. In his pre-hardware days, obviously. Metcalf showed Virgil how to put out fire by ionizing the oxygen in the air with electricity. This does create a lethal toxic gas, but we'll just kind of gloss over that when Virgil uses this knowledge to create himself a force field as he fights Hotstreak and also uses the concept to put out the fire on his house. The fight ends when Francis can no longer conjure up any flames, giving Virgil the opportunity to realize that he's using his own energy to create the fire. So Francis runs away like the big tough guy that he obviously is, leaving Virgil having to deal with the fallout of his family and everyone on his street now knowing that he has powers. It won't really come up with everyone on the street though, but you know. Freaking out a bit that Hotstreak might come after him again, Virgil calls up Metcalf, not realizing he's currently on the run from the authorities as well. But Metcalf takes some pity on him and gives him access to a storage unit where he keeps a lot of his equipment, letting Virgil take whatever he wants from the unit. What he takes is primarily some weird liquid metal thing that he calls kinetic metal that I think he starts using as his flying disc so that he can use his electromagnetic powers to levitate. Although I'm not entirely sure if that's where he gets that. And also some kind of protective fireproof suit that he reworks a bit along with a familiar hat to give himself a classic look. I love the look that his sister gives him right here. That's accurate. Speaking of, his sister Sharon is a returning character from the classic stories, and here is an EMT. And she gives him one of her EMT jackets filled with glucose tablets as some energy boosters to complete his new look. But Francis, as I said earlier, would get caught up by the feds in that rounding up thing that they did at one of those Holocaust rallies. I mentioned it. I don't know, you might have forgotten by now. I've talked about a lot of things since then. And immediately after being captured, he turned narc to help the feds round up bang babies, which works out pretty well for him. I mean, he gets out of jail and starts working with the agents and even gets his own slick suit. Sweet deal. With Hotstreak's help, the feds show up to Virgil's school and pull some secret bang babies out of class. Virgil just manages to avoid this thanks to being late to class and thanks to being stopped by his friend Darius. Darius is, I believe, a new character for this comic. Although I'll admit I don't know every character from the original series. I definitely haven't read the whole thing, and that's mostly thanks to DC being really slow about collecting it. Can you get on that already, DC? Anyway, where was I? Darius is a podcaster or streamer, or both probably, and is one of a fairly common new archetype of independent journalists always on a hunt for a big story for their podcast. Darius used to play D&D with Virgil, who DM'd along with returning characters Rick Stone and Frida Gorin, who are Virgil's other two highlighted friends. Frida is still Virgin's main love interest, as I sort of mentioned earlier, and Rick is still his best friend, and just like in the original comics, he's gay. I know because he directly states it at one point, just to make it clear for ya. Darius is also gay and just as directly makes the comment that he's black and gay, just, you know, to make sure we know. Just like at one point, Virgil's mom says that she's black and a woman. Like, we kinda gathered that. It's mostly just weird because they're kinda talking like they're tweeting rather than like they're having an actual conversation. I don't know anyone that talks IRL like they're carefully designing the perfect tweet to make the statement they want to make. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of a thing people will start or have started doing, so I guess it's fine. I do think it's worth noting the significance of this difference though. Here, both Rick and Darius are okay with people knowing they're gay, whereas in the original Static comic, Rick was bullied for being gay both before and after coming out. It's a nice way of still being able to deal with the same issues, but updating it for a modern generation where we don't have as much societal pressure to, you know, keep people in the closet. That may seem like a small step, but it still feels like progress to me. When the feds failed to find Virgil at school, they come to his home, but Virgil's parents don't trust the government for, you know, some reason. I wonder what could have possibly happened historically that would make people like Virgil's parents feel like the government is untrustworthy. It's a mystery. Realizing the feds aren't going to stop looking for him until somebody stops them, and realizing that somebody needs to help all the bang babies that the G-men have been disappearing, Virgil gets together with Darius, Frida, and Rick to bust into a giant warehouse on the edge of town that the ATF have repurposed as their Bang Baby jail. And I'm pretty sure that warehouse is also a recurring character from earlier Static comics. I mean, as far as a location as a character anyway. Also, can I mention that I love the incredibly poor job Rick and Frida did of cosplaying ninjas here? Like, that was what you went with? Rick looks like he threw some random clothes from the ground over his head, and Frida looks like she got tired halfway through a Bombshell's Batwoman cosplay. But actually, her outfit does contain some pretty great little Easter eggs. While I'm pretty sure the classic Milestone comics gave Dakota a different baseball team, in this universe, the baseball team is apparently named the Milestones, for probably fairly obvious reasons. But more than that, the player whose baseball jersey she's wearing is McDuffie, obviously named for Static co-creator the late Dwayne McDuffie. And his player number, 93, is the year Static's very first issue came out. It's such a small thing, but it's a great touch. They also, for the very first time, give Virgil the nickname Static here, as they tried very poorly to come up with nicknames for one another. They're not very good at it. The teens start an assault on the warehouse, only for Static to end up facing off against Heatwave again. Oh, Hotstreak. Whatever. This time, though, it's Virgil's powers that give out first, and Hotstreak seems to burn Virgil from the inside out. But as Virgil is lying there, seemingly dying, he knows he's gotta get up, gotta go, so he decides to pop one of those glucose pills that his sister gave him, and just is immediately back to normal. Better than normal, even, as Hotstreak's flames seem to have very conveniently burned away his costume just so as to give him more of his look from the Static Shock animated series. And yes, I can suspend my disbelief about guys who can throw fire and lightning from their hands, but glucose tablets aren't magic. They're just sugar pills, essentially, just means to regulate blood sugar levels. They're not some kind of instant energy booster, or really an energy booster at all. And I mean, if we accept that they are, it would still take at least a few minutes to be digested into a person's system. It wouldn't be the moment you used it. But whatever. Recharged, Static quickly takes out Firestarter by using his electromagnetic control to wrap him up in some wires and electrocute him some, I guess. I guess that's all it takes. That's the last we see of him. Static then joins Darius, who has managed to find all the captured Bang Babies, and he rescues them by frying the electronic locks to their cells and giving his catchphrase from the cartoon. Had to get it in there somewhere. Only he discovers that a few of the Bang Babies aren't actually all that interested in being rescued, having turned to the dark side by agreeing to work with the ATF. And longtime Static fans should recognize these characters, mostly from the TV show. You got Shiv, Talon, Puff and her pal Onyx, and Eagle Derek Barnett. Or Destruct, if you'd rather. And that starts a massive brawl of Static against all these other Bang Babies. The most notable moment is probably when Frida shows up to lend Static her baseball bat, which he then uses as a sort of grounding agent to disrupt Shiv's energy blades, giving Static the chance to spout a badass superhero line. Oh, wait, let's end this? That's it? That's all you came up with? I'm sorry, Static. I think you meant to say, science, bitch! Haha, yeah, you guys thought I forgot about that joke, but I'll never forget. Static uses the break in the action to give a motivational speech about how they really should be working together since the government men just want to see them as monsters and thugs, and want to use them in that way to prove their point. But Static believes they can be better than that if they work together instead, and on that note leads everyone out of the jail into freedom. And I guess the feds will just not lock them up again? Because everyone knows if you're thrown in jail, breaking out of it gets everybody on your side and the authorities would never try to put you back in jail. So, happy ending. From there, Static lets his family know that he's going to try and use his powers to be a superhero, and his sister makes him yet another outfit, to give him a third look in this series, and fittingly, one that now more closely matches his outfit from the third season of the TV show. He uses his powers to then hijack the TV signal and appear on TV to let people know that the narrative the feds are trying to sell isn't the real story, and also to call himself by the name of Static for the very first time. The comic then ends with a hint at some big bad waiting in the wings, teasing us about season 2, possibly the ultimate bad guy from the show, Eben. We'll have to wait to find out though until that season comes out, so until then, we'll just be getting to the breakdown. I feel like the art is the most inconsistent part of this story. It jumps around a lot from looking really nice to looking rushed or maybe sloppy. I mean, you know, deadlines are a thing. The coloring is largely nicely done, but I think there was a little too much focus on the electricity effects, or really I guess they were trying to go for like a static effect, that I often don't feel really worked out and instead just seems to kind of obscure everything that's going on. But that's only rarely a problem, and overall I like the general look of the series. I also find it interesting the direction writer Vita Ayala chose to take the series. The original comic was focused so much on Virgil, his superhero struggles, and his friends at school. The cartoon, much the same, but with his friends basically being all reduced down to just Richie, as Rick was named in the show. But this comic focuses more on Virgil's family life, making his mother, father, and sister incredibly important influences on his superhero origins and driving home where his sense of values comes from. There's also some changes to Static's power being much more finite now and being described as almost a static charge that slowly builds up inside of him until he has to just let it out. All these new elements are then mixed with all these classic parts of the original comic in the now classic TV show to create something both new and familiar, and I think it works. Reading the original Static comic gave me such a feeling of reading the classic Stan Lee Spider-Man issues. And so, very appropriately, reading this comic gave me such a feeling of reading the very first Ultimate Spider-Man arc. It's the feeling that they really have something here with this thing that so wonderfully mixes in the elements and ideas from the classic stories with modern settings, themes, and pacing. It makes me really hopeful for the future of the Return Milestone universe, and I really hope they don't drop the ball. So yeah, I'm definitely giving this series a recommendation level of high. While I definitely wouldn't call this perfect, I don't know how any classic Static fan can't see the things they liked about the original story in here, and it's also a great jumping on point for new readers, since they don't need to know any past continuity to enjoy it. The collected edition gets 1. Static Bolt, and I'm going with that being a pretty good thing. Not only do you get all 6 issues of Season 1, but you get both the full Milestone Returns issue and the 17-page Milestone Returns DC fandom preview. Yes, those are different comics. You also get a pretty good alternate cover gallery and a short sketchbook. Like the comic, it's not quite a shock to the system, but it's definitely not bad. Thanks everybody for watching, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to hit the like and the subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of Static coming back and the Milestone universe returning in general. I really am excited for it, and I really hope to cover more of the new Milestone comics on this channel, and maybe some of the old ones again as well. And if you're excited about that too, or just curious about what I'm going to talk about next, or just like the video, or just want to hang around and talk comic books in general, then be sure to stick around, and I hope to see you next time, right here in the Comic Cave.